Hello, I'm Chris Iacoi, Senior Associate Athletic Director and CFO at UCLA, and also a CABMA past president. I'm here today in partnership with Athletic Director U and CABMA, and excited to host a conversation with NCAA Senior Vice President for Administration and CFO Kathleen McNeely. Kathleen, good afternoon. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well, Chris. I hope you're doing well also.
We are. Thank you. The goal of our conversation today is to gather Kathleen's perspectives and insights on the challenges that COVID-19 has presented both the NCAA and its member institutions across all divisions. And along with that, to provide information for business managers and leaders across the industry to prepare themselves and their institutions for what the post-pandemic world will look like. So Kathleen, what an interesting couple months this has been. Can you take us back, I guess, to the start of the first couple weeks in March and exactly what went on at the NCAA office and what you guys were going through during those first 2 weeks?
Well, I think the first week was when everybody in the country started to realize that this was not the flu. It was not a normal annual flu event that this country experiences. And so I think the NCAA quickly started talking about how we could put ourselves in a position to best deal with the situation. So certainly one of the first things that happened was the creation of a coronavirus advisory panel that Brian Hainline chaired and has continued to chair since we announced that group in March 3. And I think most of you know that is a pretty prestigious group made up of people, experts in the area of infectious disease, as well as just medical doctors with federal experience to help us really reach what were the right decisions for our membership and for our student athletes. And then at the same time, the NCAA internally created an advisory team made up of Mark's senior management team to really start working through both issues related to external to the NCAA as well as our internal office operations and how we were going to deal with things as this evolved. And so certainly the first week, that's what we were dealing with. Championships for winter had started for certainly D2 and D3, and we were starting to shore up for D1 with men's basketball and women's basketball starting within a week. And I think it quickly, as that first week transpired and we moved to the second week, it became obvious that we were going to continue to have ongoing issues. Campuses were starting to share concerns about hosting, about having events, fans in our events. And it became obvious that this was going to become pretty big and an issue that we were going to need to deal with on a very timely basis as the situation evolved.
And I guess in your role, or in a role that a lot of business professionals are in college athletics, how have you been able to manage those conversations, knowing that on a daily basis we're talking up, down, and across organizations? How has your role developed, or how many conversations have you had with individuals in the NCAA and certainly throughout the membership about what college athletics looked like and has evolved into over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I would say my role, I've actually laughed at people and said that the CFO is probably one of the busier individuals in organizations right now. So my schedule has been crazy. I would say the first couple of weeks, first 2 to 4 weeks, a day off was really not something that I had. It was evolving constantly as we had to run scenarios. We had to make decisions. Certainly you're talking to a lot of people. The Division I conferences are wondering what's going on, what are the implications for them as well as for their institutions. I'm talking to D and D3 finance committees, their boards. There's lots of conversations going on at the board levels, constant conversations with the COO, Donald Remy, as well as Mark Emmert, the CEO of the NCAA. So it was constant and fast. As we had to do analysis, we had to reach decisions. We needed to make sure that we kept membership up to date. So the question is, what's the best way to do that? Who's the best people to communicate with who can then further spread the word? I think I was on a lead one meeting. I've been on discussions with CADMA leadership. So it's just been constant and ongoing. And I think the biggest thing is we've really, and I say we, I think the leadership at the NCAA has tried to make ourselves available as people have had questions. So I've talked to a lot of people over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Sure. And you mentioned certainly decisions that came about. Can you talk about a little bit about what went into the distribution decision for 1920? What resources you had available to you after certainly some of the cancellations were made, and then how has that progressed, and are we still on time, and does that look pretty promising for the rest of this year?
Well, I think most people know that the NCAA has always had a remediation plan in place, and so that remediation plan always included a decrease to Division I's revenue distribution, our insurance, cutting the national office's association-wide budget, as well as looking at how we could use our reserves. And so the minute I could still remember that Thursday afternoon sitting there realizing that we weren't just going to not play with fans, but we were not going to play, and the implications on our income statement, we started immediately putting the remediation plan into effect, evaluating the opportunities for us to receive our insurance. So what was the probability we would receive that? And we realized very quickly our fact pattern was really strong that we would receive that income. And then we started looking at revenue distribution because, and we were running cash flows. So constant cash flows. If we cut this, if we cut that, at what point, not receiving our media revenue, were we going to start to see a negative cash flow situation? So we were simultaneously looking at line of credits, and then the line of credit was informing us on how much we could actually be able to afford to send. Without a line of credit, there would have been no distribution to Division I. The cash flow would not have been present. And so then we started looking at different amounts. So I was on the phone on Teams meetings constantly with Mark and Donald, talking about the different scenarios for the different amounts. We were looking at the implications of it at the conference level, at the institution level, to just understand how impactful it would be. And then from that, we started putting our options together. And so one of the big things we did immediately was decide it would be really good to get input from the membership through the conference commissioners. And so we had a conference call with them. We shared with them various options, and then we put out a survey for them to respond to. And we used that survey information for us then to put together the final options for the two things. First, Board of Governors Finance and Audit Committee had to approve the change in the budget for the distribution. And then immediately we went to D1 Finance for D1 Finance to look at the various options. So they were looking at the options for the calculation as well as for the amount. Well, the amount was determined, but really the calculation. And so we had a joint meeting of those two finance committees so that they could work together, have common discussions, but then the voting for the amount and then the options occurred. And then that was a Monday afternoon. Because it was all happening so quickly, we allowed those committees a day and a half to think about that. And then we sent out a voting survey for them to vote on what was available to them. And then 24 hours later, we had the Board of Governors, a joint Board of Governors meeting, as well as a D1 board meeting for them to approve what was being recommended from their finance committees. So it was happening very quickly. With a lot of calculations flying around.
Understood. A lot of us have sat in those situations as well on our campuses. In terms of the distribution, You feel like that's a solid number, and those will be, there's nothing that could potentially change those for this year.
The 225 million.
Correct.
It's a solid number. I think
Okay.
the institutions and the conferences can count on that revenue.
Great. Understood. Thank you. As a member institution, certainly. As you look, I want to take a quick step back here. As you look at your budget each year and how you budget, both for the national office and also as a membership standpoint, and a lot of us are aware, certainly, that the men's basketball tournament is a big driver there. What are your other main revenue sources? Where are those coming from? Do you see any potential threats to those going forward? And are there opportunities maybe to grow that as we move forward here?
Well, I think Chris, that the men's basketball, between the media contract and our ticket sales for men's basketball, make up almost 85% of our total revenues. So we have about 40 to 45 million of other ticket sales. I mean, we have 8 equity sports. I mean, the biggest money championship after men's basketball is College World Series. And then we have other equity sports that usually bring in a little bit more money than it costs us to put those championships on. So that's a fairly large amount of money. We also have other media contracts. We have the ESPN contract for the vast majority of the other D1 championships. We have a radio media contract. So there's other miscellaneous contracts related to media. We have some royalties income. We have the eligibility center. But even all of that other type of revenue only makes up about $53 million. So men's basketball dominates on the revenue side. We talk a lot about revenue mitigation. What are the other things that we can do? And I think we have grown things. I think the fact that College World Series is so popular, the decision to go to a new stadium in Omaha has been a really good decision. We've seen that on our income statement. I think there are opportunities to grow some of the other championships. But when you talk about other revenue, we're pretty limited. We are a membership association.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about that, that means we're not out there selling widgets. And certainly we can grow our championships, but that comes down to what the interest is of the general public out there for those championships.
Sure. Understood. Thank you. And then I guess on the opposite side of that, certainly the expense side of your budget, and so much of your dollars are obviously distributed back to memberships across all divisions. And certainly this is not the place to talk, litigation likeness and any legislation issues that may come up, because that's a different process altogether through the governance model. But what other expenses and what are you guys protecting against on kind of the expense side, and what are you anticipating as we go forward?
Well, I think because we let membership know that we've cut over $175 million out of the budget over the next 18 months. So about 90 million of that is from championships. I mean, certainly we had savings from the cancellation of winter and spring championships this year. We had already sunk a lot of money into the winter championships. When you're just a few days away from starting your event that brings in 85% of your revenue, you've already spent a lot of money getting ready for that. And so we kind of had that across the board, a lot of work untangling these championships. And the same thing for spring. A lot of work had already gone on with the spring championship. But overall, I think originally we found over 70 million that we felt we could save. And then since then, through staff just working on those contracts, we've been able to bring that up to closer to 90 million. In savings. The rest of the money is being saved through mostly association changes. So certainly regional rules is now a webinar for this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to save us money. We had to cancel the inclusion forum. So a lot of our events have been canceled. And then I think we're currently suspended on traveling. And when we open up travel, we will be business essential travel only through August of 21. Positions that were vacant are frozen. The executives, top 10 executives took a 20% salary cut, and the others took a 10% salary cut. And so we're going to continue those types of things to try and create as much cash flow as we can to really kind of offset what might happen next year. We've made it a point to secure and try and retain our human assets, which is our staff. The NCAA is not a heavy capital invested organization. Our capital is our staff. And we are certainly hoping as we are up and running in a few months and we're back to normal, and I say that with my fingers crossed next year, that we have the staff to continue to serve the membership at the service levels you've expected historically.
Sure, understood, and certainly can appreciate those conversations that you've been going through as we have as well. On our levels, and then one last question, kind of on the budgeting model. You've certainly been fortunate to have a reserve built over the past couple of years, and the decisions to use it, how you build it, and then how to potentially rebuild those. Have you put much thought into that at this point, or do you have a plan as to what you're looking for?
Well, I mean, I have thought about it a lot. It has not been a priority with everything else that's been going on. Certainly our ability to start to build back up our reserves is going to be pretty limited for the next 18 months. Really, our goal for the next 18 months is to be standing and be financially secure, and if possible, to see that we're in a position next year at this time to do a full distribution to Division I. That is our area of focus. I think after that, you're right, Chris, we're going to need to step back. I'm going to have the Board of Governors Finance and Audit Committee revisit our reserves, our reserve policies, and say, do we have the right reserves? And what would those look like? And if we do want to grow them in any way, how do we go about that growth without adversely affecting our membership?
Understood. And then a couple times you've mentioned the next 18 months, and just like a lot of us on our campus, we're all trying to understand what scenarios may play out, or what to expect and what it could look like. Are there any mile markers, guideposts that you're looking at to say, hey, we could be okay, and everything could be similar to what 18-19 was in terms of distributions or from a membership point of view, or some things that we may see and we're going to know right away, hey, this isn't going to happen the way they thought or the way we had predicted it to look. How has that process looked basically for 2021 from your standpoint, both at the national office and then for the membership to look forward towards?
I think the big, I think it's the big question for all of us is fall. So what is going to happen with our fall sports? Unlike our institutions, football is not a huge moneymaker for the NCAA. We have the FCS championship, but we spend more money on that championship than we bring in revenue. And certainly that is the case for all of our fall championships. So the exposure on the championship side is not as high as it was for winter and spring this year. But I do think what's important for us is the need for our sponsors to be able to activate in the fall. So our sponsors are year-round sponsors. They are sponsors who support the NCAA for 12 months. And we need opportunities to allow them to activate, whether it be at our championships or whether it be just through their normal advertising during football games. Nothing better than seeing an advertisement during halftime of a football game where they say proud sponsor of the NCAA. And so I think fall from that perspective is going to be a big moment for the NCAA, and as it is for our institutions, but for a different reason. Although I know all of you, between your ticket sales and your media, fall is huge.
Sure.
And I will say that probably more than anything, we're worried more about our institutions than we're worried about ourselves in the fall.
Understood. Thank you. And then another question is, as we're budgeting forward, right, if you're in our shoes or if you're in your shoes, is there an expectation that potentially, be it men's basketball unit distribution or the other distributions from the NCAA, be it sports sponsorship, grant and aid, student assistance fund, academic enhancement fund, and the like, is it safe to assume that we're going to get back to those figures, or gradually build back? Is there something that we should be looking at that can help us understand what our projections should be for the coming year?
Well, I think if our hope is we're back to normal. So we are budgeting the full revenue distribution next year. So where we have cut other areas of our budget for 2021 fiscal year, we have not cut revenue distribution for D1. I know D2 plans on doing their distribution, and D3 plans on continuing their programs. So I think from that perspective, our goal is that we are serving membership fully next year. I certainly think that schools and conferences need to start thinking about their own plans, which you're doing anyway. I mean, the revenue distribution for Division I, as an example, is a small proportion of the total revenue budgets for D1 institutions. But in the same way, the NCAA is going to have to revisit and say, are these the reserves we believe they should be? I think the institutions need to start doing the same thing, athletic programs, and saying, do we need to start to build up our reserves in case something like this happens in the future? I certainly think that's an opportunity. I think everybody should revisit their insurance. Do you have the right terms? We have pandemic covered in our event cancellation insurance. Many events do not have that coverage. And certainly maybe if schools had any kind of revenue replacement insurance, there's a chance they're not covered by pandemic. So I think people need to look at their insurance coverages and say, are we at the right place? Are there other things that we could be doing? But I think reserves probably are important because I was with an institution for 29 years, a higher ed. I know that higher ed doesn't tend to go out and borrow money for operations.
Sure.
So reserves are a big way to kind of mitigate for future risk.
Understood. And, as we're looking, into next year, something that business managers always either enjoy or it could be a pain for them sometimes is the agreed upon procedures for the coming year. And do you foresee any major changes coming because of our most recent situation? Or I know certainly an email just went out this week about some of the minor tweaks. And when we're talking about the agreed upon procedures, how are those categories defined? And I guess back to my initial thought is, do you see any potential changes coming up either in the coming year or beyond that, either COVID related or anything related?
Yeah. So COVID related, I would say no. I think that asking the athletic departments to try and identify specific expenses related to COVID is just adding to a burden that you're already feeling. And I'm just not sure of the value that would be added. Chances are your athletic directors are asking already what you're spending on COVID. So you might know that, but it's harder to really do a kind of reporting of that. So we don't plan on asking that question. The only really change to AUP is we're providing a little bit of guidance from the auditor perspective on sports sponsorship. And since you had sports that didn't occur this year, what we're going to use instead so that you can get credit for the sports that you planned on occurring this year. But that's really more informational for the preparers as well as the auditors related to the agreed upon procedures. The agreed upon procedures, you don't want your financial reporting to change every year because it causes, you just don't have the consistency of year after year looking at your trends. And so our goal isn't to change that every year. I think right now we're not looking at any significant changes. There might be a minor tweak. And sometimes we add greater definition, but I don't think there's a plan at this point to change any of the major categories.
Understood. Thank you. I'm sure our staffs thank you as well in that category. Certainly, as we're starting to wrap up, one quick last question is, how are you and what keeps you up at night these days? Outside of, potentially what could be, are there challenges, and are there ways that we as business managers or leaders in this industry can help you from our standpoint?
Well, I mean, I think my continuing to be informed on what the business managers of athletic departments are going through. I think that's important for me. I've made a couple of phone calls to just ask people what's happening at your institution and to get their feedback. So I think people's willingness to take my phone calls or even just to voluntarily reach out to me to tell me what's going on in your programs, how you're dealing with this situation is really important. Right now, I'm using the conference commissioners as a way to provide input and insight into what the institutions need in regard to things like revenue calculations, revenue distribution calculations. But at this point, I mean, we have our remediation plan. We will reintroduce that remediation plan next year. If we run into additional problems, we will revisit the association-wide budget. We will look at our reserves again. And so that plan is really in place. I mean, I'm always interested in what membership wants and what your thoughts are, but that's kind of where we're at right now with the plan. It has served us very well so far, and I'm hoping it'll do the same in the future.
Okay. Well, Kathleen, again, thank you so much for your time today. I know, just like everyone else, we're going Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting or team meeting to team meeting in your case, and there's been plenty here that I know that those of us in business offices and throughout college athletic departments can take with us and kind of keep in mind as we start planning for what our post-COVID world looks like. And definitely just want to thank you again for your time and all of your efforts at the NCAA and all of your colleagues as well, because it's certainly appreciated at our level. And again, wishing you continued health and wellness going forward.
Well, the same to you, Chris, and certainly to everybody who's watching this. My best wishes and just the thought that the NCAA, we really are thinking about all of our athletic programs. So we're very hopeful for the fall, and we look forward to our future.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for your time today. This was a collaboration between Athletic Director you and CADMA to provide another service for the membership out there, and wish everyone the best, and thank you for joining us today. Stay well.